Hello and welcome to the Vicars Watch Dibley,
the podcast where three priests link our stories with those of a Reverend Geraldine Granger and other TV vicars. I'm Kate.
I'm Jenny.
And I'm Ruthie. This episode, we're talking about the episode from season 1 called Elections. And so we'll be talking a lot about politics, but also about social isolation.
Good morning, lovely ladies.
Good morning.
And good morning to all our wonderful listeners. We are recording this podcast right in Holy Week.
How's everyone else been? How's your past week been? Let's start with you, Jenny.
Thank you. Yeah, my week has been good, thank you. I mean, obviously the week before Holy Week, I think can be sometimes even more intense than Holy Week, making sure you've written all your sermons, all your service sheets, all your slides. So I've been a bit like crazy in terms of just making sure everything's ready. But I've been trying to pace myself better this year because the last 2 years with the pandemic has meant everything's had to change so dramatically for Holy Week and Easter. So it's nice to be leading in a kind of familiar territory again. So the Holy Spirit and caffeine have been to great aid this week.
Amen, amen. How about you, Kate?
I am really enjoying doing proper parish Holy Week.
Yeah.
It's not that we didn't do Holy Week at my previous churches, but now I'm the incumbent and we're in villages. So we had an Easter bazaar on Saturday, which was so lovely.
Nice.
And on Sunday, Palm Sunday, we did proper procession. And we didn't manage to get a donkey this year, but I've been promised we will have one next year. But I had a donkey costume that I put someone in.
Brilliant.
And palms. And we did the dramatised Passion Gospel. Absolutely wonderful.
Brilliant.
And yeah, now just getting stuck into making sure I've got everything ready for Maundy Thursday, Good Friday. Unlike you, Jenny, I have not prepared everything in advance. I am working on it today and tomorrow.
Yeah.
So when this episode actually comes out, we'll have done Holy Week. So we'll be able to look back and go, oh gosh, we did this. And unlike you guys who are proper vicars, because I'm not a proper vicar, this past weekend, I've been on my sister-in-law's head day.
Oh, that's great.
So instead of doing Palm Sunday things, I was feeling a little bit worse for wear.
Party Sunday for you.
Coming back home. Oh my gosh. We stayed out till like 2:30 in the morning and it made me realise that I am just too old for any of this. Everyone looked very young and looked very chilly in all their cut-out clothes, but I absolutely killed it at karaoke.
That's the main thing.
Other than that.
Another fantastic thing that's happened this week is we actually got to see each other, me and Ruthie.
Yeah, me and Kate got to see each other because on the way to this hen day, I realised that Kate lives about an hour away from where I needed to be. So it was after our last recording session, I just went, oh, Kate, can I come stay with you? And so we got to hang out and we had tasty food, we drank gin, we watched The Swan Princess and Anastasia, and it was amazing.
It was amazing.
So we're trying to plan a time that we can all get together.
definitely.
And we could actually record a podcast episode
In person.
Wow.
live in the flesh.
Wow.
That would be
Magical
crazy.
times.
So this week, we don't think we've got any confessions as far as we know, but it's possible that we do have one. So instead, Jenny is going to tell us a little bit about herself.
Indeed. So I'm doing this week the I'm a Vicar and segment. Not particularly juicy one this week, but I wanted to confess to all of you, I am a vicar and do you know what? I am wildly untidy. I have a terrible habit of doing something and then my desk is in like a whole dumping ground. Even as I just sit here before you all, there is paper upon paper, there's DVDs, there's textbooks, resources, there's Bibles, there's lectionaries, there's bits of boxes of cakes that I ate even way before Lent. There's Christmas resources, there's a plectrum, there's 101 sticky notes and pens and all sorts and cards and printer cartridges even. Anyway, they all came to a head when I was in church on Sunday. We were getting ready for Holy Week, and our lovely intern is leading Compline this week. In the evening, Compline is a prayer of night service. And we walked into the church and we were like, right, let's really make it a beautiful atmosphere for people to come in. I'll have some candles lit, just have this beautiful, peaceful atmosphere. And he was like, yeah. So we walked into church together and we got to the chancel, so the kind of top part of the church, usually where the choir sit. And on the desk opposite the organ, it's probably quite hard to picture, but it was just a complete mess. And it was with all the things I'd left out that I usually use for communion every week and have to sort of gather very quickly. And, you know, I set up not in the vestry, but on this table. And he was like, well, that all needs to go. And I was like, you're absolutely right. But I thought, oh my goodness, it's not just my desk. It's whatever desk I touch. I just honestly turn to chaos. So I'm a vicar, and I'm very messy. Maybe that is more of a confessional, actually.
I have 3 different mugs of past teas on my desk at the moment. And my desk is fairly tidy for the moment, but I am also very guilty of this, of just having piles of paper. I've got 3 different nail varnishes on my desk as well.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, on my desk I've got a how to podcast book, I've got 2 mystery novels, I've got some sacrament, which I'm taking, I'm going home visiting today, so I've got some communion.
You've got Jesus on your desk.
I've got Jesus with us, doing the podcast with us.
Perfect.
Sat by us. I've got a fidget toy, I've got a rock, I've got a big pile of papers and resource books. Yes. And a used fountain pen cartridge.
For the memes.
We may be messy in our lifestyle, but not messy in our spirituality.
Not sure about that either. Anyway, let's do what we actually do.
Yes. Moving on to talk about our episode for the week. The past couple of episodes, we've broken our sequence a little bit. We did a themed talking episode about comedy and humour. We did an Easter episode where we jumped ahead to look at the Easter special, but now we're returning back to our sequence, moving through the episodes of The Vicar of Dibley, and today we're going to talk about Season 1, Episode 5, Elections. This is about politics, so it is likely to get political. These are our opinions, and there will be other vicars, other clergy who disagree with us.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, the episode's called Elections. If it didn't get political, we're missing quite a large point of the episode. So we'll go through with it. And I was saying to these girls earlier that I watched the episode to make notes and things like that. And then I checked our book of scripts to make sure it was in there, and it's not in there. So I then watched it again so I could write notes, so I could lead us through the episode. So you're welcome. I did my research this time, mostly. We'll see. So the episode starts with the parish council, and they're all hanging out in the church hall, and the parish council begins, and there's talk about Letitia wants a bus, but the main thrust of the conversation is that the vicar, Geraldine, is going on the radio.
Yes, she is, which, I don't know about you, but this does happen. I mean, have either of you been invited to contribute something to local radio?
Yeah,
I have.
You tell yours, Ruthie, first.
I've had a phone interview for the radio when we had our first Christmas in lockdown, and we had to do Christmas services very differently. So I did a drive-in with the rest of church, but I helped organise quite a lot of a drive-in nativity service and a drive-in carol service. So we had these 2 different services that we did. And so I was on the radio talking about that and how to book tickets for it. And it was amazing. It was such a good thing to do. So yeah, I was on the radio talking about that. What about you,
fun.
Jenny?
I have actually. I'm quite lucky. So the first time I was on my local radio, which is, shout out, BBC Radio Northampton, they interviewed me when I was coming towards the end of my training at Theological College, Cranmer Hall, because I was going to be the youngest priest in the diocese. So that was the first time. And then since then, I've gone on to sort of share a couple of minutes. Once I did a talk on kind of what Ash Wednesday is all about and why Christians do Lent and what's that all about. I've also done, so last Christmas I put together a choir. Well, it was our church choir plus a few people from our local village community choir, which is really big. And we basically sang some carols on and off through the morning show. And then the viewers of BBC Radio Northampton had put together a local carol. So then we sang the carol, which was really cool as well. So fun. Lovely. But then I think the best thing I've ever done is our local. Sorry, this is exciting. I promise. Our local sort of coffee shop worked together with another local kind of farm shop who creates chutneys and jams and sauces to create Northamptonshire sauce. And they invited me, this lovely coffee shop, they're called Jay's, to go down and be the first customer to buy this Jay's Northamptonshire sauce. So I did, and I wrote a poem all about Jesus and, you know, about how he loved to dine with people, and maybe a bottle of Northamptonshire sauce would have been right up his street. But it came to the moment where I was supposed to buy the very first bottle, live on the radio this is, and I forgot my money. So I got to the till and I was like, can I owe you? And then luckily the lovely guy from Friars Farm, Steve, he was like, oh, here you go. And like ushered a £5 note into my hand. He was like, here you go, have this. And I was like, oh my gosh. Didn't even bring my purse to pay for the first bottle of Northamptonshire sauce. But yeah, but can I also say the last thing, and this is topical, is the last time I was on the radio was to do a mastermind, which I went on and did the Vicar of Dibley. Yeah, so that was my special topic, and I got 3 out of 5, which it was just slightly shameful, I think. But you know, I would have thought I'd be 5 out of 5.
Jenny, what did you get wrong?
I didn't know where the show was literally filmed.
Oh,
yeah, I can't remember. I still fail at that, and I can't remember what the other one was. Again, yeah, not very good memory. But it's so much fun, actually. It's terrifying, I think, to be on the radio. And I always listen back and go, I can't believe I've said that. Like, oh dear, the things that come out my mouth sometimes. Just as in, like, the way I phrase things, I think, when I'm a bit nervous, doesn't always come across well. But I love it. And I love the... another thing I did a very long time ago was go on and talk about women in ministry alongside a colleague who was but he was not for women in ministry and the church wasn't, and we sort of had a live debate about this, and it's so, I find it really energizing, find it really exciting, but it is also daunting as well.
Yeah.
That's amazing, Jenny. I didn't realise that you were like minor Christian celebrity on BBC Northamptonshire.
No, not at all. I sort of pop up for like the odd thing. But I think it's because they probably know that I'm fairly willing to give anything a go. Like there was talk of doing a dog nativity, and one of the presenters,
No way.
They rang me up and they were like, "We've got this idea. What do you think?" And I was like, "I'm away." But I think they know that I'm a bit of a. I'm happy to, you know, I don't know, do some quirky things maybe, and I think that's important, isn't it? But
yeah, and I think
amazing.
The media, whether that's radio or anything else, if they have that initial contact with you and it goes well, and they feel that you are a fun person or a safe person or an interesting person, I think they will then reach out to you a bit more. I did a radio interview when I was in Sheffield, BBC Radio Sheffield, because during lockdown, well, actually, generally I'd started something called a Lights and Darkness service at Christmas, which was about loneliness and journeying together through what can be a very difficult season for some people. And I did a radio interview about that. But then I moved away to start this job. But then here, where I am now, our deanery, so that's our district, I suppose, where lots of different parishes are grouped together. Our team does get asked to do things on the local radio. At the moment, we're asked to do a lot of desert island discs type of stuff fairly regularly. So at Christmas we got asked to do our top 10 carols.
Awesome.
For Christmas, or Christmas songs. Which, I mean, I haven't been part of a recording, but I've been part of the planning for what we were going to suggest. But yeah, once you build those relationships, I think they can be really fruitful, but really scary, because often, at least in Sheffield, the interviews we had were always at a ridiculously early time in the morning, and you'd be rung up and be trying to get your thoughts together. And sometimes sometimes one of, there's usually at least one of the presenters who is maybe looking to push you a little bit further than you were planning to go as well.
Yeah.
That's a very diplomatic way of saying it.
So if anyone's listening from the land of radio or TV, we'd love to be on. We'd have a laugh with it. It'd be great fun. Just call us in the afternoon. That'd be great.
Yeah. And, maybe get us all three on at the same time. Safety in numbers and all that. Unless we start bickering over something.
Probably. You never know.
And talking of Desert Island Discs, that's a sort of show which Geraldine has been invited to do. She's been asked to bring some songs along, suggestions from her community. So I suppose my question is, what song would you request Geraldine to play?
Do you know? Oh, no. Yeah, I'm going to have to say it now. So I feel like this is also my karaoke song, but it's the first song that I think of. Not sure if this is controversial or weird, but it's Raining Men by Jerry Halliwell.
Oh my God.
By Jerry Halliwell, that version as well, not the Weather Girls.
I mean,
sorry, that sounded really judgmental. I didn't mean to be judgmental.
Genuinely either. Yeah, I'm just double checking in my heart. But either.
Yeah, I was surprised you didn't go for the original. That was all.
I think I'd be content with either. As long as I can sing along, I'm fine.
Have you seen the video for the Weather Girls version of It's Raining Men?
Is it terrible?
Yes.
Can I highly recommend you go and watch it, because they're using green screen, but one of the Weather Girls is wearing green as part of it. So like suddenly her legs disappear or something like that, or a top. I can't remember what it is, but it is really, really bad and hilarious. So
check that out.
Yeah, hearty recommendation.
What would you guys pick?
I'm struggling because I tend to listen to stuff like Planet Rock and that kind of radio station. So I'd be tempted to ask for something Black Sabbath-esque or Metallica and that kind of thing. Because it's hard, isn't it? You want to pick a song that people will enjoy, but do you also want to go for something really niche that you're like, here's an introduction to something, or here's just a song that I like and you're gonna have to endure it. But if I was gonna go down the kind of pop end, I mean, you can never go wrong with Beyonce, can you?
Well, that's true.
I feel like a Beyonce track would be a good one to go for if I was not allowed Slayer.
How about you?
What about you, Kate?
So I've been listening to a lot of musical soundtracks recently, particularly Tick Tick Boom and the Beetlejuice Broadway soundtrack. And I love the Beetlejuice soundtrack and I really want to go see it, but it's only running in Broadway. It's recently restarted, but I don't have the resources to be able to go over to New York. But anyway, I'd be really tempted, because I listened to it a lot, to ask for the whole being dead thing, which is the second song of a Beetlejuice musical, and I love it. And I also think it's really, there's a certain irony maybe, or maybe irony is not the right word, a certain humorous appropriateness of a vicar really liking a song, the opening, the gambit of the song is welcome to a show about death, and it's Beetlejuice saying, I'm going to be your guide to the other side, your guide to what happens after you die. And it's a little bit rude, but it's very funny and it's very catchy and I really love it. I find myself singing it about the house. However, that is very niche.
Yeah, that's a niche choice.
It's a very niche choice.
But a good one.
But shout out for the Beetlejuice musical. Please come to the West End. Please,
That's
please.
easier for us to get to.
On radio.
Good
Cool
shout.
choice.
There we go.
So Jerry gets all these requests from people for songs, except she doesn't, but asks for them. And then we move on to hear that it's Frank's birthday. It's Frank's 60th birthday. And so they move on to have a little bit of a party for Frank. And I don't know if you noticed this, but the banner that's in the background that says Happy Birthday, Frank, they've just got a piece of paper and stuck over the banner where a previous name has been and put Frank. And underneath you can see the name Hugo. So this is clearly a classic thing that they do in where they have a party afterwards. And so Jerry goes up and asks Frank what his plan is for his birthday. We have an awkward bit about manure and all that kind of thing. And he says that he wanted to go see an exhibition about train timetables or something like that. Not even trains, but couldn't do it because of the bus timetables, which is really sad that there isn't a bus there anymore and he couldn't afford the taxi.
Yeah.
And so he manured his dahlias for his birthday instead of going to see about trains.
Yeah, which when I was watching, my heart melted for him. Like, oh, Frank, you were alone, and maybe he really enjoys those activities, but actually when I was watching it, and I think this is a theme throughout the whole episode, it's something we encounter a lot as servants of the church in community, is social isolation, and particularly social isolation of pensioners or older people, where often their partner has passed away, or a lot of their friends are passing away, or their family have moved away and aren't visiting, and they're living alone. And it's our job to try and help them feel included, or at least for an hour every couple of weeks to go and spend time with them and give them company.
Yeah, it's a really tricky thing, isn't it? I think, and it's the case often in rural areas, where they don't have the bus, and so there's a lady who comes to our church here occasionally, but she can only come if her daughters are visiting because they have the car, because the church that was in her village has shut down. And the bus timetables don't work for her getting into this one. And it's really difficult to feel part of the community. So much of what churches do, I think, is that social aspect of getting people together and helping them to feel included and welcome and not so lonely. I think it's life is very lonely for lots of people.
Definitely.
And I think particularly during the pandemic, it's gotten a lot worse. There's been lots of people who just haven't felt safe leaving their homes. But then on the other side, a lot of the services for them were stopped. So churches stopped a lot of the things that were on offer for a lot of lockdown, and they're starting up again. But there's lots of people who now feel like they can't go out because they've lost the confidence. And home visiting was really difficult as well. People couldn't see their friends, and we couldn't go and see them. So social isolation is a huge aspect of parish life, trying to support people and help people feel included. I think particularly as well with people who have mobility issues and aren't able themselves to get, even if church is just down the road, aren't able to get to the building for a service, or for a cafe, or for whatever activity which they would help them feel included.
I helped with a safeguarding day once for the Diocese of York when I was in there, and it was all the big cheeses from various different places. So like the head of the police in Yorkshire was there, and people from a domestic abuse charity were there, and we're all trying to talk and communicate about safeguarding and the role that the church plays in it, partly because that information sharing is so important to know what's happening, and often we don't get to hear it from the police or things like that, but actually there's lots of organisations that don't realise how much the church does for people in different ways. And so we had all these kind of safeguarding scenarios of what might be happening with the church, of, you know, someone from the church goes and visits this elderly person, does a shop for them and that kind of thing, and they've started to notice this and they don't know who to tell. And the table that I was on, talking to these different organisations who try to help people in lots of different ways, they didn't realise that this is a regular thing in the church, that every church has the Margaret where someone goes and does their shopping for them. And they just didn't know that was something that the church ends up doing. So yeah, it's a big part of our life, isn't it? Trying to care for those who feel isolated.
Yeah.
And us as well. I think the clergy person can also feel very isolated. Jenny and I were talking before recording about how isolating ministry is and can be as well, but in a very different way. I think we see a lot of people, but it's the deep personal relationships which can fall by the wayside.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's funny how in this episode we do see social isolation, like it's weaved, isn't it, in and out of this episode, which I think we'll perhaps see later on, especially in the final scenes. But this, Frank's party, this is also the beginning of setting the scene for the theme of the episode as well, isn't it? This is the beginning part. Just when we think David's going to do something lovely for Frank, comes over with an envelope, we think, oh, it's a little birthday gift. But it's not. It's the bill for the wine. And then he comes with this, I'm guessing I can count on your vote. And it's this social isolation, isn't it, that's kind of alongside... Then we get the real theme of the episode with this politics, this campaigning, and I do think it's quite clever how they weave together in this episode.
Well, it's a balance of the clear need that there is in the community. You have a WI, the Women's Institute, who desperately want to go on day trips to enrich their lives.
to go see the Chippendales.
To go see the Chippendales, but they don't have the transport. You have Frank, who wants to have a life and go explore his interests on his own, but can't. But also his birthday party is from a parish council. It's not family. It's not his close friends.
I think they probably are his close friends. You don't... I mean, Frank's unmarried, isn't he? And I expect he's got to the age where if he has siblings, I have no idea if he does... he's 60, isn't he? So they may well not be around. I assumed he was older.
Yeah, I mean, my parents are in their 70s and may look a lot younger than him. But I mean, I think it's interesting. You could do a really interesting analysis of how close the parish council actually are. There's a little bit later where Geraldine refers to Letitia as that croppy woman, and there's, I don't know. I think that we see it varies dramatically. Episode to episode, how close the parish council actually are. Perhaps Frank and Owen and Letitia and Jim, I think, are actually quite close.
Jim and Frank have got a bit of a bromance going on.
Jim and Frank have
a
good friendship.
Yes.
But we have that clear need, and obviously the contrast being brought up is actually that the district councillor doesn't seem to be concerned with this clear need.
And Jerry does the social faux pas of going, who is our councillor? Mr. Absolutely Anonymous.
Mr. Totally Invisible, Mr. Total and Utter Dingbat, representing the Do Sod All Party. I wrote that down. I liked that.
And of course it's David, who is the councillor. And I'm surprised that Jerry doesn't know that beforehand. But yes, I think there's... my dad once gave a sermon around Christmas, where he talked about how much he hates sprouts, and sprouts are the worst thing in the world and everything like that. It was related to Jesus in some way. I can't remember what. And then someone at the end came up to him and said, "Oh, I found it really interesting, your sermon and your opinion on sprouts." And Dad nearly launched into a, this is why I hate sprouts so much. And this bloke said, "I'm just going to stop you there because I'm a head of the Sprout Appreciation Society." Or something like that. I think it's very easy to accidentally mess things up. So, yeah. So we find out that David is the counsellor, and perhaps he's not doing as much for the community that Jerry thinks he should be doing. And then the next day we end up in the vicarage, and Geraldine, having eaten some of Mrs. Cropley's food, is having some struggles with her bottom and is struggling to sit down and all that kind of thing. And Alice is sat there trying to decide who to vote for in the next upcoming election when David and Hugo appear at the door.
So this begins one of our other discussions of the episode, and I think something which comes up every election season or whenever clergy get any, or whenever clergy make any political statement or suggestion in their communities. And is it okay for clergy to be political?
Ooh, this is the big question of the episode in a way, isn't it?
Yeah.
Juicy.
I would never stand up in a sermon and say, "This is who I'm voting for. I think you should vote for this person as well." I would, in a sermon, say, actually, when it comes to political season and elections and things like that, what kind of people should we be voting for as Christians, and what kind of thing was Jesus concerned with? And Jesus is concerned with the poor and the lost and the lowest, and making sure that they're cared for as part of society. And the early church, when they're created, that's what they're concerned with. They look after the widow and the orphan, and actually whose policies align best with that. And think about it that way. I think elsewhere in my life, I'm very open about who I would vote for and who I would definitely not vote for. But it is a weird line to toe sometimes. And should we toe it? I don't always know.
It's tough, isn't it? Because I'm thinking, actually, sometimes I'm two people. Now, I don't necessarily see this blend in this episode of the Vicar of Dibley. I mentioned before we started recording that Geraldine very much seems to be relating to David and her parishioners as Geraldine the human being, not so much Geraldine in the role of vicar or priest. Now, that could be a whole debate in itself, but I'm thinking that sometimes when I relate to people in my parish, I can be two people. Sometimes I'm there as Jenny, the friend and the person, and then sometimes I'm there as Jenny, the vicar. And the helpful distinction for me is a collar or my vestments. And I'm all of these things all of the time, but when I have the space to stand in front of people, a congregation in the church, as a servant of God and as a minister, I would never, and I fear using that privilege, if you will, or using that platform for what I think is the right thing, because I'm not flawless, I'm not perfect. But I think you're right, Ruthie, because there's a thing that's kind of well, let the text speak for itself. Do you know what I mean? But the thing is that people will apply, of course, their own logic to what you're saying. So when I was listening to you about the rules that Jesus gives to us and the concern of the early church, I was imagining what it would be like to be someone who votes in a particular manner on the right-hand side of the political spectrum and on the left being yes, well, that fits with my view. Yes, that's it for that.
Yeah.
And do you know what I mean? And using it to even more cement their theology, but I mean their political ideology. But I think that's why having a space for people to talk about these things is so important. That's, I think, the great thing. If we can all talk about it as church family, then surely there's a wealth of treasure there.
And often as clergy as well, you have a relationship with your local councillor in some way, or MP, you know, depending which kind of church you're in. And so you need to keep those relationships well to some degree. You know, I might struggle if it was certain people who but I'm very unlikely to be in those constituencies, I feel.
Yeah.
Can I make a slight confession here?
Please do.
I've just had a funny memory, which I'm going to confess, and I'm not. Hopefully, this isn't too cheeky. In my life as a vicar, I find myself fairly often writing intercessions, and I do remember at the time of Jeremy Corbyn's campaign, I accidentally, and I believe it honestly was an accident. It's just because of the sphere of culture I was living in. In my intercessions, wrote about something to do with bringing God's kingdom, which is for many, not the few. And I only noticed, like, later after the service, and I was like, oh no, it definitely sounds like I was,
Very nice.
But I think, for me, there's a distinction between my personal politics and then the pastoral need of the community. I think it's perfectly right to talk about issues, and I think particularly in the pulpit I might talk about a very relevant issue at the time. What are we doing? So obviously with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, I've talked about that. And there are other times I've talked about food poverty before. So talking about issues, but separating that from party, because I think as soon as you start talking about parties in the pulpit or from the front of church, then you're automatically alienating a whole group of people. And it doesn't help. It closes down the dialogue. But also, it's not our role to enforce a particular political mindset on others. We're meant to encourage the conversation and the reflection. In the same way as a very similar instance in my village, where people know I try to live more eco-consciously as much as I can. I don't always succeed, but I do try. And I think there was a conversation we had about burials and maybe what I would like to happen in terms of going out in the most eco-friendly way as possible. And maybe I might have said something, been reflecting on how, I don't know, even caskets or vessels which you can be buried in aren't as biodegradable as we might like. Or maybe they'd overheard me saying I don't want plastic to be buried in the churchyard. But that got then misconstrued, or it got then communicated to others who I hadn't met, hadn't talked to, saying, oh, the vicar's an eco-warrior and she doesn't allow caskets to be buried in the churchyard, which is completely not true, because I don't think it's my place to tell other people how their loved ones should be buried. And for me, that is that separation. I can have my personal convictions, but there is a point where you say me expressing my personal convictions in a certain way is going to cause harm and damage. And I can help people reflect on issues, but it's not my job to tell anyone what to do in that context.
It's an interesting line, isn't it, to go down? Because David has this line about, well, he calls the Bible socialist claptrap at one point. Jesus never told the rich to give all their money away, to which Jerry goes, I think you'll find that he did.
What was that you were preaching from the pulpit? I think it was a Sermon on the Mount, which, actually, nitpick, Jesus doesn't tell the rich to give all their money away in the Sermon on the Mount. He says, blessed are the poor in the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus and the rich young man, in which he tells the rich young man that in order to find the kingdom of heaven he needs to go away and sell all his belongings, is actually in Matthew 19, Mark 10 and Luke 18. Important enough that is actually in 3 of our 4 Gospels. I just thought if I were Geraldine, I would have added that snarkiness. You're right, it's not in the Sermon on the Mount, but it is in 3 of the 4 Gospels.
And David says to her, telling her off about the sermon, he says to her, "I will not be undermined by left-wing priests spreading hardcore Marxism." And I think if someone said that to me, I'd take it slightly as a compliment.
Yeah, well, there's that. There's a bit of a dichotomy of labels that get applied to clergy, aren't there? There's a really stereotypical lefty priest label, which some people use as an insult and other people wear as a badge of pride. And also the Church of England has been described as the Tory party at prayer, which is really interesting because both of those seem to exist and both of those labels get applied fairly equally. Is that because actually we exist more in the middle ground because we're not trying to have allegiance, or is it the levels of involvement? Obviously the Church of England has seats in the House of Lords for our bishops. But anyway, I would wear the lefty priest label with pride.
There was that, it was a while ago now, wasn't it, where the bishops in the Church of England all wrote that letters to Parliament. Was it about food banks?
I don't remember.
I can't remember what.
Yeah,
I
think so.
There was something, I think it was about food banks. Here, that'll be the confessional next time. Where they all wrote this letter to the government saying, look at the state of the world. Well, not the state of the world, but the state of the world. Look at what's happening in the UK. And actually, there is an unacceptable level of poverty and use of food banks. And you need to sort this out. And people were so angry that the church had involved itself in politics in that way. And how dare the bishops write this letter? And I was immensely proud of the bishops at that point to just, stand up and call it out and say, this is wrong and you need to do something about it. It made me go,
I think
woo!
You are right, Ruthie. I think we need to be at the fore. The church, as a broad church, inclusive of all denominations, needs to be at the front of justice issues. I remember with the attack or the demise of Wonga as well. I was like, yes, so important, and it's finally stepping into that place. But you're right. I imagine the backlash is and was and would be huge. But yeah, I mean, to have that prophetic voice is so important.
But the problem is, however, we're not always consistent as an institution. So taking Wonga as an example, it was then revealed that the Church of England actually invested in Wonga. And part of that is the way that investments work in the Church of England and potentially, the Archbishop. The Archbishop isn't really involved with that.
Didn't know, did he? He's not going to know exactly.
But and that we will speak up on some issues and you'd be very progressive on some issues, but then there are other issues which the church is well known for being very conservative on. So it's there is a sense where we do need to discern what the best way to speak out is and to investigate ourselves and interrogate ourselves to make sure that we're not being hypocritical as well, which I think is one of the big, not insults, but big accusations against the church as an institution is hypocrisy.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And fair play to Justin, when it came out about Wonga and it being an investment, he came out, didn't he, and said, I didn't realise that. We're going to stop that.
Yeah.
That's not on. As opposed to just shoveling it under the carpet whoops, didn't hear that. Actually standing up and apologising and say, we didn't know that, we need to change and do wrong, I think is very, very important. So good job, Justin.
The distinction, and I think that's a brilliant example there, of the distinction between the organisation, the institution, and the individual clergy person, because the Archbishop of Canterbury is also just a clergy person. He is a priest. He's a bishop as well as a priest, and he's also a deacon. But just like us in our contexts, whether it's parish or another role, such as Ruthie has in Missional Youth Church Network, we are individuals and we all have our own political understandings, our own passions, and so as individuals we will want to campaign for the things we believe in, and that isn't always aligned with what the institution is doing. Sometimes it is, but there is a separation. Just because we're part of an institution doesn't mean that we know everything that's happening in the institution or that we support everything that the institution stands for.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So going back to where we were talking about, with David talking about all this and wanting that distinction and don't get involved with it. I don't know about you two, but I had to do a lot of Googling of names in this because it is very firmly set in the 90s and I had no idea who Nick Faldo was, but possibly because I have no interest in golf either. So I had to check out who all these different people are that, Nick Faldo is a golfer. I didn't know that.
I worked that out through context because, of course, at this point, Geraldine and David are talking about where the money is being spent, which Geraldine feels should be spent on transport and other similar community serving projects, and we have instead a golf course which no one uses except David and his friends. And
£2,000 spent on him booking Nick Faldo to open it.
Yep. And lots of trips to European cities and towns.
Yeah. I love that that Hugo accidentally calls out his dad for this.
Time and time again as well.
He's narrowed it down to these small villages and
and these two beaches.
Yeah. He does it a few times.
The town twinning committee. Yeah. And there we go. And so we then move on to Horton House. And we see Hugo has been playing on the computer and has made himself some election graphics, which are stupendous. And I love the old monitor. And it reminds me of watching the elections and seeing Jeremy Vine with the big green screen and him striding across to do all these really complicated election graphics. Whereas Hugo's is, there's a 2% change, and that's because
this particular house.
This house has switched from yellow to blue because there's different people in there.
For our non-UK listeners, Jeremy Vine is a presenter who, when it comes to election season, he presents the graphics for elections and all the stats. What channel news is that? Is that BBC?
BBC, Channel 4, one of those.
That'll go in the confessional next time we record. So then Hugo turns on the radio so that they can catch the Vicars radio spot on Radio Badger. And
so
Geraldine is talking about the lack of bus service in Dibley. This, for me, brought up a really important facet of the clergy role, which is community organising. So that's mobilising the community and liaising with the parish councils and officers and other government types and other organisations to find solutions for some of the problems and needs in the community, and helping the people of the community be involved in enacting change in their communities. So this is a really classic example of people saying there's no bus service, and then Geraldine using her power, her influence, her connections to start that conversation and start the ball rolling for change to happen.
And again, Hugo kind of lands David in it, doesn't he? Because he's outraged at what she's saying. He's like, I was never invited to take part. But just a moment ago, before, we've heard him say to Hugo, and I think before as well, clergy should keep their communist conks out of politics. And then Hugo's very proud as he quotes this to the radio presenter. And he's like, oh, I got you word for word. And David's like, oh, no.
Yeah. David didn't get the interview because his campaign manager, aka Hugo, said clergy should keep their communist conks out of it. And we finished this scene with the classic song from Kylie, who we have previously seen from Vicar of Dibley, singing I Should Be So Lucky.
And a nice boogie from...
Thai flip, it's beautiful. Yeah.
And then as the radio show continues and Geraldine pushes on with her little campaign against David Horton, we see everyone tuning in and listening and agreeing with what she's saying.
Including seeing Letitia making a cake that looks absolutely delicious with strawberries on top, and she just covers it in ketchup, and you're like, no, that looks amazing. But then she adds
sprinkles. Does that balance it out?
I tell you, she's doing it deliberately.
Yeah,
she's deliberately producing food that looks tasty and hiding the weird ingredients.
Yeah, she's a cookery sadist. I love it. And Owen having his lunch with the cows and just laughing along to what Geraldine's saying, and then the radio show has happened and we see Alice and Geraldine in the churchyard walking along, and it's quite clear from their conversation that Alice has accidentally listened to Gloria Hunniford as opposed to the radio show that Geraldine was on. And Jenny, you are a big fan of Alice.
Do you know what? Especially in this episode, and we're going to come on to it a little bit later, but there is just a few one-liners or like moments for Alice, I think, in this episode that are hilarious. So I know maybe this is racing ahead, but when David and Hugo come over to the vicarage and he walks into the lounge and Alice is there and says, I'd like to have a word with the vicar. And she's like, she's just answering the door. I'll tell her that you're here and then you can have your chat. Do you know what I mean? She just doesn't get it at all. But then, again, like you say, when she was like, oh, you've got a lovely motherly tone, slightly Irish. When you did that lemon recipe, it's just absolute gold. I love her so much.
She's... so beautifully naive, isn't she?
Yeah, absolutely.
And she's ridiculous, but not in a way that you just... I'm not irritated by her. I just find her adorable.
She's ultimately lovable, really, isn't she? Ultimately lovable,
Yeah, and I believe Geraldine in this scene is wearing a particularly stunning outfit that you seem to be emulating today, Jenny.
I was very excited. When I was watching this particular episode, I noticed that I was wearing a very similar outfit, which is black trousers and a white jumper. Now, I realise that that's quite a standard outfit, but I was like, oh my gosh, me too. I was very excited.
I'm just like Jerry.
Exactly.
She has lots of good outfit choices in this, doesn't she? She's got a hairband on at the beginning that is just really cool, and I'm tempted to go put a hairband on.
Do you know what? It actually reminded me of you, Ruthie. You are the queen of wearing cool hairbands and pieces. So, yeah, I was like,
thanks.
yes.
Oh, it's one of the useful things I've taught our placement student here at the moment, is I've taught him how to tie his hair up. And he's been doing a half up, half down look, and I'm very proud of myself. Amazing. So
the things you learn at a vicarage, things you learn.
Yeah, mainly hair maintenance.
And that's where we join that's where we join Jerry next, isn't it? Back into the vicarage, and we suddenly realise that after her radio show, she's suddenly gained a whole party of political sponsors.
Yeah, they've all got placards saying Jerry's our girl and vote for the vicar and all this kind of thing. And I wondered if you could actually be in a political office as a vicar or not.
Yes, so I did some research on this because I'm very confused about this, because I've definitely heard that clergy can't run for political office. And the distinction is actually in the Catholic Church canons forbid their clergy from holding public office. It's canon 285. But in the Anglican Church, it's rare but not prohibited for Anglican clergy to run for public office. So the confusion comes is Catholic priests cannot hold public office, Anglican priests can.
You've reminded me now, at a previous church that my dad used to work for, I think there was a retired clergy who was a counsellor. Now you've rung that bell. But it after all we've talked about, it is a bit of a weird line to cross.
I think the reality is that if you are a parish priest, I don't think you would want to run for public office because there is no time or energy to do that. And I think it would conflict with your pastoral role in the community. But there are clergy who don't have those parish roles who do take up public office. And the rare occasional parish priest who will run for public office because a specific change needs to be made, or there is a specific policy or something.
But it's not only that that Geraldine has her supporters, she also has, her supporters are also willing to do the dirty on David, aren't they, as well? I think they say just in case it doesn't go right, just in case things don't go in our favour, we've worked out a smear campaign for David as well, with some rather hilarious but also slightly traumatic signs.
And Geraldine looks quite uncomfortable actually with the dirty tactics.
She does until the end of the scene, when she goes, really? She thinks so, and she has this little smile that's like, if you think I can, do you think? And I think that's it's interesting, isn't it? It's like she's probably never ever thought of going for this at all, and yet the little flicker is there of, you think I could be someone important and influential.
I wondered if that was her going, so if you think people would vote for me, I have the chance to use this in my favour to get David around my finger and get him to sort out some of the social issues. And
that's a nice way of thinking of it.
Well, how I interpreted it was more, actually, this is Geraldine really appreciating her cheerleaders. Because having cheerleaders is really important in parish ministry, because so much of the job is, and I think particularly in village ministry, rumours get around so quickly and things are distorted, like it's a big game of telephone. And having those people who will cheer you on and cheer you up and big you up, just someone saying, Jerry's our girl, and is our vicar, we love her, you're amazing, we all love you, you should be our parish councillor because you're so amazing. Like for me, that's her saying, oh, you're so nice, you like me so much. Because cheerleaders are so important in ministry, those people who will encourage you and who you can rely on to support you and you can trust to support you.
Yeah. And so it's come quite clear from Hugo then going and canvassing people saying, well, David Horton, have your vote, that people have gone, no, I want to vote for the vicar instead. And so David gets wind of this and goes to the vicarage, and to talk it out with Jerry, saying, what the heck's going on here? And her little smile when she opens the door, like, David, what a surprise. And David comes in to say, this is ridiculous, don't like this, and Jerry's like, actually, I don't want to be a counsellor. So how are we going to sort this out?
Very interesting, this scene, isn't it?
What Jerry does is she plays with the power of clergy endorsement here. She knows that people are supporting her, that people would vote for her. So she is using that influence to in turn influence David to align more with what she wants to happen. It's really interesting here that she's not thinking about the political parties. There is a conversation about the Labour candidate, Kevin Smewin.
Yeah, I hated that.
Why?
I felt that the way she talked about him was quite disrespectful.
Yeah, she does poke fun at his acne.
Yeah, she calls him Clearasil Kev and says he has a face like an international sport convention.
He has a good heart, she does mention.
Oh, did you say that?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
She says he has a good heart. But it's interesting that they don't mention any of the other candidates. We know from Hugo's presentation that actually the second party in Dibley is the Liberal Democrats, the Lib Dem, that they definitely seem to have, from Hugo's graph, more votes than Labour do in Dibley. And I believe when we later get the results, I'm pretty sure I see the Monster Raving Loony Party up there.
I wondered this, but
we'll get to that soon. But anyway, it's interesting that there becomes an either Conservative or Labour, which is actually the narrative of our country. We have our two main parties. But Geraldine doesn't seem to be aligning herself with a particular party. It's more about the relationship and the morals and who can actually achieve what needs to be done. And here she feels that she can use her influence to get David, who is a Conservative candidate, to reach the outcomes that she sees as needed.
Yeah. So they go out to go visit some of the constituents, don't they? And they first go to Letitia Cropley's house, and then in time for tea. And so they go in and have cake with Letitia. And there's a joke here about David saying about the sex change operation. If it was cheaper, he'd join the WI, and that made me very uncomfortable. That doesn't feel right. Well, it never would have fallen right, but especially nowadays.
Well, and it's so ingenuous. WI is short for the Women's Institute, which is an institution in the UK. Usually communities either have the Women's Institute or the Mothers Union, the MU, and it's a group of women who do things like baking and crafts and often mobilise themselves to do things in the community.
Like go on trips to see the Chippendales.
Yeah, but also it is also a social thing, and it is combating social isolation, which we come back to not only with this visit to Letitia, but also they then go to see Jim and they go to see Frank. And for me, these three examples are three classic examples of visiting in the parish, where you're just going around to check in with people, have a chat, but you have things like you're fed interesting food and lots of tea that you sort of push your way through. There's awkward discussions about whether or not to invite you in, or there's...
No.
Yes.
Yes, would you like to go
Yes. Or you have people who just want to talk. What they don't show of is people who don't want to talk and just want you to talk. And that can be, for me, that's the most awkward type of visit. But this is a really important part, as I said, of ministry, visiting with people.
I have drunk some really bad cups of tea in my time in ministry, and eaten some probably quite weird things. But I do it because actually it's people's way of showing hospitality and love to you. And I've had people prepare like full-on feasts ready for the vicar to come over. And you just think, this is insane. And actually, I know you haven't got lots of money. And the fact that you prepared this, I am going to appreciate this and enjoy it as best I can. And this is the milkiest cup of tea I've ever eaten. I'm not even sure that there's a tea bag has been in this. But do you know what? I'm going to drink it because you have prepared this for me. And what do you think,
I think
Jenny?
that is very true. I think the thing that this scene also reminds us, we've talked a bit about social isolation, but we haven't talked so much about poverty. And you mentioned about those that not having enough, not having a lot of perhaps, material stuff or wealth, putting on these big feasts. But this is the first time that we see Jim in his home. We meet his wife for the first time as well, side note. Where did she spring from?
No, we met her in the Summer Fair.
Community Spirit, yeah.
Oh, did we?
She's next to him, but we don't really...
I missed that.
I don't think we know her name or anything like that.
Me, confessional. But also we hear that their leak is... They've got quite a serious leak in their roof. And so it's not only social isolation, it's also kind of hitting on themes about living in poverty. And again, for rural ministry or rural areas, this is a big thing. I think something big to tackle. Yeah. So it's very interesting that gets a bit of a note as well. And that David is challenged with, how are you going to make this right for your people?
It's checking on welfare as well as the personal relationships. And I mean, I love visiting. It can be really awkward because inviting yourself into someone's house is awkward. But it's lovely. I love spending time with people like that. So Geraldine pressures David into making some election promises to fund a bus for the WI, to fix the leak in Jim and Doris's roof. and
Doris.
to establish a bus service which will come multiple times an hour.
Yeah. That seems great, isn't it?
Twice a week, day, hour.
It's only what's right.
Yeah. And then we get to the election day, and we are in a building that we're a bit confused by, because it looks like Horton Manor, but there's a big sign that says polling station, and they're announcing the results on the balcony. It's a bit like when the Pope gets announced or all that kind of thing. It's big, but if David Horton's house is the polling station, I feel that's corrupt.
Well, it reminds me
ways.
very much of that episode from season 3 of Blackadder, which is the elections episode where Blackadder takes advantage of a rotten borough to gain a seat in...
I have no knowledge of Blackadder.
Well, there will be some listeners who know
Others
Blackadder and will understand exactly what I mean. But anyway, that exposes some of the corrupt nature of politics. And
did you notice the candidate on the balcony, the other ones who haven't won? There's someone dressed as the Easter Bunny. Is that who you thought was in the Monster Raving Loony Party?
Again, for context, the Monster Raving Loony Party, who I believe aren't around anymore, they were a party who would deliberately have really outrageous policies,
Impossible
things
policies,
like outlawing Brussels sprouts.
My dad would be on board with that.
And they would, in the Blackadder episode I just mentioned, they're called the Standing in the Back Looking Stupid Party. And they would often come to elections dressed up in very ridiculous get-ups. And we still have them. So we have the bin guy. And you still get them as the kind of third candidates who are I guess it's a protest vote.
Yeah, it's a protest vote.
Yeah, that's the point
of it. To say that I don't agree with any of these people, and I think they, are corrupt and whatever it might be. And so I'm voting for this party that I know is ridiculous, but it's my way of getting that point across. And so they must have, well, it's not reused, but it's a preemptive view of the Easter Bunny outfits. I think it's one of those costumes that's used later on. So... yeah, there we go. And it turns out that David has won the election and everyone cheers. And David says, thank you very much. And I will double my efforts, triple, whatever he says, to twin this village with every country in Europe except for Belgium, which seems a bit neat. And I think this is the start of a little seed in your brain that goes, hold on a second, what about those other promises that he made? And then we come to the parish council meeting where a note is made congratulating David, and it turns out that perhaps there isn't enough money in the budget to find a bus, and there isn't for the WI or for the village, and people aren't happy.
Yes, so David very quickly goes back on the promises he has made.
So sad, that scene.
Then makes a quick exit from a parish council, and they start to plan his death.
Plot his death. Mrs. Cropley says she'll poison him because no one would know.
Yeah,
she does know her cooking is awful.
As I say, I think it's deliberate. I think she is deliberate.
Interesting.
But then what we see is Geraldine does have a plan, and I love this plan. So they all head off to the golf course, which is one of those...
Oh, just before the golf course. So Geraldine has this plan. Is Hugo still in the room? Because I can't remember seeing him there on the council, and they don't zoom in on his face. So I'm wondering if they're plotting David's demise in front of Hugo. I can't remember. Did I do you?
Does he follow David out? I can't remember. Oh, I feel so bad for Hugo now that I just didn't notice him in that scene.
So, but yes, they come up with a sneaky plan, don't they?
Sneaky plan of malicious compliance. So this is Geraldine's planned protest. Earlier in the episode, we know that David had a golf course built as a great activity for Dibley, really just for him and his friends, but it is a public golf course. So Geraldine's plan of malicious compliance is that every pensioner in the village will go and start using the golf course, invading David's territory and forcing his hand to create initiatives to combat their social isolation, to bring a bus service, etc., so that they no longer use his stupid golf course.
And it's amazing, isn't it? Because the first hole that they come to, and David's there with his foreign visitor, who I'm assuming he's trying to twin a town with, and the vicar's there in what is stupendous get-up with her bright yellow hat and golfing trousers. And there's Mrs. Cropley, who's on her 111th shot on the first hole, and Frank's busy whacking bits of turf out of it, and you just see the physical pain that David's
really do,
while the turf's been knocked everywhere.
Mrs. Cropley's in heels as well.
Yeah, it's amazing. And you've got Alison Hugo on the next hole, the rest of the WI. And one of the things that we've been talking about this is social isolation. And actually, perhaps one of their problems could be solved by this golf course. That actually, if this is a public golf course, here's a way to get people out and about and doing some physical activity and being together. And maybe the solution was there all this time, but David's not a fan of that, so finds some money for the bus. And one of the excellent moments of this scene is that Geraldine speaks to the foreign visitor, assumes he's French. I'm not really sure what accent he was trying to do, and says, "Bonjour, monsieur, bon pantalon," after her rude comments about trousers. And because of that, we are wearing bon pantalons as we do this particular episode. I personally am wearing leggings, which on one side of my leg there is a unicorn, and the other side there is a dinosaur wearing a cyber helmet, and they are fiercely battling each other under a rainbow, and it's all bright colours, and it's stupendous. Jenny,
I brought with me my bon pantalons are a pair of, what would you describe them as? Harem pants. They are they're purple and blue and white and gold, and they are baggy and très bon.
Yes. And I was going to wear a pair of really lovely polka dot trousers. They're black with white polka dots, sort of the inverse of what Geraldine wears earlier in this episode. But my back's bad today, so I'm just wearing plain leggings and comfy clothes. But I'm wearing them in spirit.
Bon pantalon in spirit.
Spiritual wearing of bon pantalons.
But bon pantalon in a very different way in terms of comfortable rather than chic.
Final thing on this. I don't get golf and I don't enjoy golf unless it's in the crazy form and you've got to hit it through a windmill. That's my final
Geraldine is very
on
good
golf.
at golf, though, apparently.
I was going to say, she totally gets that, doesn't she? Because I love that, that final line. I don't know why you enjoy golf so much, David. It's just so easy. And then she hits a shot without even looking. And I think this is the really great scene where after Geraldine has taken so much flack from David with his, honestly, I think his bullying, his assumptions, his like really quite rude and outrageous remarks, she never rises to any of them. And yet in this scene, finally, she doesn't get her own back. But I remember even in one of the vicarage scenes, she goes, "Oh, what silly little me in my dog collar," because David has belittled her so many times, and yet here in this scene with all the parishioners, she finally gets to almost get her own back, not not in a too much of a mean way, but she finds what the heart of it that David is struggling with, and is able to kind of come down to his level almost, and I don't know, get a little bit of her own back.
He totally underestimates her, doesn't he?
Yeah, big time.
He just thinks she's this silly little woman, and actually no, she's got a real powerhouse behind her.
And I feel like if I was if someone like that was in my parish, it would be very easy just to burst into floods of tears, lock the vicarage door, be like, I'm never going out there again. But she doesn't. She listens and takes it all on, and then she's given her moment to be like, okay, this is who I am.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hole in one.
And I have a final statement I would like to make. In conclusion, David Horton is an absolute slimeball. That's my closing statement for this episode. Except for the joke.
Ooh.
The joke, which once again, Jenny, you refused to listen to.
I turned off the episode before the joke. I don't know what's wrong with me. I think I'm under pressure, guys. Feel sorry for me instead.
Well, both me and Kate had to Google it because we didn't get it. So, Kate, have you got the joke written down and see if Jenny
I have the joke written down, and I had to. I think part of my issue was there was a certain lack of clarity in the way it was delivered, and there weren't any subtitles, so I really needed to Google, but also to interpret the joke afterwards. The joke is 2 nuns in a bath. One says, "Where's the soap?" The other says, "Yes, it does rather."
Yes, I remember having this conversation with my university friends because I did not get this joke at all. I think I get it now, but I'm also not 100% sure.
So,
what do you think it means, Jenny?
I thought it meant that the nun was rubbing the soap on her bottom.
her front bottom.
In her bottom, yeah.
So
yeah. The suggestion is that the soap
that she's putting the soap up her bottom, up her front bottom.
Yeah.
Yes. Which
yes,
I think
the suggestion
not cool.
is that she has been using the soap to pleasure herself, which I didn't realise was a thing, but apparently is.
No.
And that's why it's worn out, and it's the difference between where's W-H-E-R-E apostrophe S and W-E-A-R-S, where and where. For me, the reason I had so much confusion to begin was because I didn't hear two nuns in a bath, or as Geraldine says, in a bath. I heard a bar, as in two nuns in a pub. So I was really confused what soap had to do with a pub. If Geraldine had a northern accent, we wouldn't have this confusion.
Yeah. And what's really great about this joke is that Alice laughs at it straight away, like she gets it. And Geraldine's not convinced and say, why is the joke funny, Alice? And Alice thinks it's funny because one of the nuns is deaf or something like that. Yeah. And Geraldine says, yeah, that's it. You should tell your grandma that joke.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Vicars Watch Dibley. Thank you to Toby for editing our ramblings.
Any views expressed in this podcast are our own and don't necessarily represent those of the Church of England or any other organisations with which we are affiliated.
And as always, bless you for listening.
Who is head of the Communist Kitty Party?
I don't know.
Chairman Meow.
I don't know if I should be laughing at that.